Welcome to the channel. Quick, engaging, and straight to the point, that's what you'll get here. If you love content that keeps things interesting without wasting your time, hit subscribe and enjoy the ride. My husband gave me an ultimatum on a Tuesday evening in March, and I agreed to every word of it. He stood in our kitchen with his arms folded, telling me I needed to apologize to his colleague by Saturday dinner. Or he didn't know how much longer he could do this with me. I told him I'd think about it. Then I spent the next 3 days thinking about it very, very carefully. And on Saturday I showed up at her house and delivered the most thorough apology he'd ever witnessed. It just wasn't the one he'd rehearsed with her. Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here. If you believe that honesty matters more than comfortable silence, consider subscribing to The Concealed Bonds. It's free, and it helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them. Now let me take you back to where this actually started. 6 years ago, I thought I'd built the kind of marriage that people describe when they say they married their best friend. My husband and I met at a mutual friend's housewarming on a warm September evening. He was a structural engineer at a mid-sized downtown firm. I was a freelance UX researcher who worked from home. He was standing near the back of the party, actually listening to the conversation he was in, rather than scanning the room, and I noticed that first. We ended up arguing good-naturedly about urban transit policy for 2 hours on the back porch while the party wound down around us. By the time the host was stacking plates, neither of us had moved. We dated for 2 years. I learned he couldn't sleep without a white noise machine and cried at certain ocean conservation documentaries, which he denied whenever I brought it up. I learned I rewatched the same 3 films when I was stressed and needed exactly 12 minutes of silence after finishing a difficult project before I could talk about anything else. We got married in October at a venue with exposed brick and good lighting. My mother called it the most relaxed she'd ever seen me. Look at a social event with more than 10 people. We bought a townhouse in a neighborhood where people still knew their neighbors' names. We split the bills. We cooked together on Friday nights and let things burn sometimes because we were talking too much. We talked about kids with the cautious optimism of 2 people who wanted them but weren't rushing. About travel, we kept promising ourselves about the future with the specific ease that comes from genuinely believing the person beside you is choosing you back. I want to say this clearly because it matters. I wasn't unhappy. I wasn't in a marriage I'd been tolerating. I was in something I'd chosen fully, and I believed he had too. The erosion was so gradual, and so consistently reframed as my own failing, that I didn't understand what was happening. Until I sat down at my husband's desk on a Wednesday afternoon in February, and found a folder that rearranged everything I thought I knew. Isolde joined his firm 14 months after we married. He mentioned her the way you mention weather. Casually, as context. She'd transferred from a larger firm in Chicago, had a strong reputation for complex load-bearing projects, and they'd briefly overlapped at a professional conference a few years earlier, and recognized each other immediately. He seemed genuinely pleased to have a familiar face at the firm. That was all I registered. When I met her at his firm's fall mixer, she was exactly what he'd described. Not flashy, she was too careful for that. Dark trousers, a structured blazer in a muted burgundy, earrings that read expensive rather than showy. She had the particular ease of someone who'd spent years in professional environments and learned precisely how to put people at ease without actually opening herself to them. She welcomed me warmly. She asked questions about my work. She made sure I wasn't stranded in a corner while my husband fell into shop talk with colleagues. Her husband, Crispin, was there too. He was quiet and methodical in the way of someone who works in financial risk analysis. The kind of person who asked one precise question, rather than a handful of careless ones. He noticed things. I caught his eye once during the evening, while Isolde and my husband were absorbed in a long conversation about a shared project. And the expression on his face, patient, watchful, a little tired, created a brief inexplicable kinship I didn't yet understand. The first violation was small enough that I talked myself out of it. Our 5th anniversary dinner. A restaurant we'd chosen weeks in advance. The kind of evening where you get dressed with intention and feel, for a few hours, like your ordinary life has been briefly upgraded. We were halfway through our entrees when his phone lit up across the table. He glanced at it, set it face down, it lit up again. By the time the check arrived, he'd checked it 4 times and responded twice, and offered me 3 variations of, "It's a work thing, I'm sorry." The work thing was Isolde. She was anxious about a presentation on Monday and wanted to talk through her approach. He thought it would take 10 minutes. It took us losing the rest of the evening. When we got home, I told him quietly that I'd been looking forward to that dinner. He said he understood. But this was a colleague in a genuine crunch, and he'd feel terrible leaving her without a response. He said it in the tone of someone explaining something simple to someone being unreasonably difficult about it. I filed that tone away. It would become familiar. Over the following months, the pattern extended itself. She texted him on Sunday mornings while we were still drinking coffee in bed. She called on Saturday afternoons, during the low phone walks we'd built into our week. She started appearing in our conversations, not as a colleague, but as an authority. I sold. Actually thinks the renovation plan might affect a load-bearing section. Maybe we should have her look at the drawings. As if her opinion on our home had been implicitly solicited. She became a presence in rooms she'd never entered. Except then, she did enter them. My husband added her to our shared calendar for what he described as coordinating project timelines. He began taking evening calls on the back porch, which I noticed because it was a new habit, and because when I came downstairs unexpectedly one Friday morning, and he saw me through the glass door, something passed across his face before he composed it. He wrapped up the call quickly and came inside, and told me she'd had good news about a contract. Every time I raised any of it, there was an explanation waiting. I was being territorial. I was misreading professional closeness as something else. I was threatened by her competence. I needed to trust him more fully. My discomfort with his having a close female colleague reflected my own insecurities rather than anything he was actually doing. He said all of this with such patient practiced weariness that I began to doubt my own perception. I want to be specific about what that is, because I spent a long time not having the word for it. It's gaslighting. The systematic dismantling of someone's trust in their own instincts. By the time I found the evidence that proved those instincts had been accurate all along, I'd spent months believing I was the problem. My laptop died on a Wednesday morning in February, mid-project, screen going black without warning during a client deliverable due by 4 in the afternoon. My husband had offered me access to his personal laptop dozens of times, with the easy generosity of someone who claimed to have nothing to hide. I grabbed it without hesitating. 2 hours in, while searching for our shared tax documents, I found a folder nested inside an archive labeled with a single letter. Its modification date was recent. Something about the placement made me pause. I opened it. Photographs going back nearly 2 years. My husband and Isolde at restaurant tables I'd never seen or heard of. Both of them leaning in the way people lean when they've forgotten other people are in the room. Close-up shots she'd sent him. A book she was reading. A view from somewhere. Her coffee on a particular morning. Selfies of the two of them with his cheek near her temple. Both grinning like they were the only people in on something. And screenshots. Message after message carefully saved. I read the first one with hands that had gone cold. It was from 11 months ago. Sent at 12:47 in the morning. She'd written about feeling like she was living 2 separate versions of herself. The one she'd constructed with her husband, which looked correct from the outside, and the one she actually wanted, which looked like something else entirely. She said she wasn't sure both versions could keep occupying the same space. My husband had responded within 4 minutes. He wrote that he understood more than he could fully say. That he sometimes thought about the version of himself who had made different choices. That what they had, and he used the phrase, whatever we're allowed to call it, meant more to him than she probably knew. I read that 4 times. My client deadline passed at 4 o'clock. I didn't notice until the following morning. I spent 3 hours cross-referencing our joint credit card statements against the photo timestamps. Every Thursday. Not any day we'd ever discussed. Thursday. There was a charge at a restaurant called Haverhill Kitchen. Between $60 and $90 each time. 51 consecutive Thursdays. A year of weekly lunches conducted in complete silence from his side of our marriage. I found the gift receipts in his email. A leather portfolio from a design boutique, $195 logged around her promotion. A bottle of wine sent to her office when she closed a major contract. A plant delivered to her apartment during what he told me was a difficult professional period for her. The note on the plant said, "Because everyone deserves something, living in their space when things feel heavy." Signed with just his initial. I built a folder. Labeled everything by date and category. Made 3 copies across cloud accounts he had no access to. Saved 2 additional copies to a USB drive I tucked inside a book on a shelf he never touched. Then I made dinner and waited for him to come home. The confrontation lasted nearly 3 hours and accomplished nothing except confirming every tactic I'd been subjected to for the past year. I had violated his privacy by accessing a personal folder. I was catastrophizing a friendship. I was extracting meaning from private conversations that had none. I had always had an irrational problem with Isolde. And this was simply the culmination of it. When I told him about the message sent at 12:47 in the morning, about living 2 lives and missing whatever they weren't allowed to call what they had. He said it was philosophical, that she'd been processing difficulties in her marriage and he was supporting her, that nothing physical had ever happened. And I was building an affair narrative out of nothing. I told him that emotional affairs destroy marriages just as thoroughly. He told me I was the one destroying ours by refusing to trust him. Then he shifted. He sat down across from me with the deliberate patience of someone who has decided to be generous. He said, "If you actually want to move past this, there's something you need to address. Isolde has known for a long time that you don't like her. She's felt it every time she's been around you. She told me it's hurt her. She's tried to include you, and you've kept her at arm's length, and if this marriage is going to work, that dynamic has to change. I think you owe her an apology." I asked what exactly I'd be apologizing for. He listed it: treating her with suspicion, making her feel unwelcome, letting my insecurities affect his professional relationships, failing to extend a basic courtesy. I said, "And if I don't?" He said, without blinking, "Then I'm not sure I can keep putting energy into something that isn't working." The room went quiet, in a way I'd never felt in that house before. "Fine," I said. "We'll do it Saturday, dinner at their place, all 4 of us. I'll say what needs to be said." He looked at me with something I can only describe as relieved triumph. He started texting her within the hour. He thought he'd won. He had staged this perfectly. His wife, publicly submissive, his emotional affair partner vindicated. The arrangement formalized and protected by my own apology, he thought. He had orchestrated every element. He had no idea what I was actually agreeing to. The next morning, after he left for work, I called Crispin. We'd probably spoken directly fewer than 15 times over the years. He was always at the edges of gatherings. The person who noticed when a glass was empty, who read the room without performing it. I had his number saved in years of coordinating social plans. He picked up on the second ring. I told him that my husband had arranged a Saturday dinner, that I'd been asked to come and apologize to Isolde, and that I wanted to make sure he'd be home for it. There was a pause, then simply, "I'll be there." No confusion about why I was calling directly. No questions about the specifics. Just immediate, quiet understanding. The same understanding I'd seen in his face at that first mixer years ago, the look I'd recognized without knowing why. I said, "There are things you should probably know before Saturday." He said carefully, "I've suspected some of it. I wasn't sure I could trust my own read." "You can trust it," I said. "I'm going to bring documentation. I wanted you to have warning." He thanked me. He sounded like someone who had been carrying a weight for a very long time, and had just been told he wasn't imagining it. Friday night, my husband coached me. He had actual bullet points on his phone. Acknowledge my jealousy, affirm Isolde's integrity, thank her for her patience, express hope for a fresh start. He suggested I bring flowers. He was so earnest about it, so thoroughly convinced he had managed everything correctly, that the distance between what he believed was happening and what was actually happening felt almost surreal. I practiced the expression he wanted. I asked clarifying questions. I nodded. He told me he was proud of me for being willing to do this. Saturday arrived gray and cold. I dressed carefully. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would read as performance. My husband drove. He talked the entire way about how meaningful this would be, how our marriage would be stronger once we cleared the air, how Isolde was genuinely looking forward to it. He reached over and squeezed my hand at a red light. That was the last time he'd reach for me, believing I was on his side. Isolde opened the door looking like she'd dressed for exactly this occasion, which she had. Cashmere, in a deep green, dark trousers, the understated jewelry of someone who knows her things, cost more than they look. She'd set the table with a cheese board and wine and small coordinated plates. She had designed this scene with care. She was ready to receive what she believed she'd earned. Crispin came out of the kitchen. He looked different from every other time I'd seen him, not relaxed but present. The full alertness of someone who had decided that this particular evening, he was paying complete attention. His eyes found mine briefly and held them. I saw acknowledgement there. We sat. Wine was poured. My husband settled in with the ease of a man entirely at home. Isolde arranged herself with gracious patience, the posture of someone about to be generously forgiving. I set my wine glass down on the coffee table. The sound of glass on wood seemed to carry further than it should have. I looked directly at Isolde. I want to start by saying that my husband was right, I said. I do owe you an apology. Her posture eased a fraction. Her chin lifted slightly with the beginning of validation. Just not the one either of you scripted. The air in the room changed. My husband's expression faltered. Isolde's smile held for one beat longer than natural, then dropped. I kept my voice level even. The way I'd practiced it for 3 days. I apologize for staying quiet while I should have been speaking. For convincing myself that instincts were jealousy, rather than accurate perception. For months of swallowing what I knew because I'd been told so many times that naming it made me the difficult one. I reached into my bag and set my phone on the coffee table, already open. 51 Thursday lunches at Haverhill Kitchen over the past 14 months. I have the credit card statements organized by date. If you'd like to review them. I slid the phone to Crispin. He took it. His hands didn't shake, he began to read. Messages at 12:47 in the morning. I continued, still looking at Isolde. About living 2 separate lives. About the version of yourself you actually want. My husband responding that he thinks of different choices he could have made, the two of them agreeing that what they have. And he described it as, whatever we're allowed to call it, means more to him than she probably knows. Isolde's face had gone completely still. My husband stood up. Stop. This is not what. You're taking everything out of context. You're weaponizing private conversations too. You asked me to apologize in front of both spouses, I said, without looking at him. I'm doing exactly that. Crispin was still reading. I watched him scroll through the screenshots methodically, his face the careful neutral of a man who processes information before he responds to it. I watched him find the message about the life she actually wanted. I watched his jaw set. How long? His voice came out completely controlled. 2 words directed at Isolde with the precision of someone who has eliminated every other variable. Not a shout. Quieter than a shout, more effective than one. She tried the reflexive denial. Crispin, nothing physical ever. How long has this been going on? My husband made one more attempt at control. He turned to Crispin with his palms up, his voice taking on the measured, reasonable tone I had heard. Directed at me for over a year. You both need to understand that what Isolde and I have is a close friendship. Close friendships involve emotional honesty and real connection. That doesn't constitute anything improper. My wife has misread. The leather portfolio, Crispin said. He was still looking at my phone. He held it up slightly, indicating the receipt. She told me that was from a grateful client. Silence. The wine, the plant. He set my phone down on the cushion beside him with deliberate care. What else? I stood up, I smoothed my jacket, I picked up my bag. I looked at my husband one final time. This man who had arranged an evening designed to make me small. Who had scripted my performance and coached my expression and believed he had managed every variable. I said, you asked me to apologize. Done. You wanted it in front of both of their spouses. Done. And when you told me you didn't know how much longer you could do this with me if I didn't fix it by Saturday? I held his gaze. Consider it fixed. He grabbed my arm as I moved toward the door. You can't just leave, we need to. Please, you're my wife. I pulled free. Talk to an attorney. I walked out of Isolde's carefully staged living room, with its coordinated cheese board, and good wine, and designer sweater, and I stepped into the cold March evening. I called for a car from the front steps. Behind the closed door, I could hear Crispin's voice, quiet, exact, the tone of someone who does risk analysis for a living, and has just identified the most significant exposure in his portfolio, asking questions that were not going to stop. In the weeks that followed, my attorney, a woman with a reputation for being surgical and unsentimental, reviewed everything I'd documented and told me it was exceptionally comprehensive. She said, my husband would characterize me as vindictive and unstable. She said to let the evidence speak for itself. He did, it did. About 3 months after my divorce was finalized, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that my husband and Isolde had briefly attempted to build something real out of what they'd shared. It lasted approximately 4 months. Once the secrecy was removed. Once it was just two people with ordinary logistics and professional overlap and the mundane daily weight of a relationship that had to function in daylight. What they'd had turned out to be mostly the architecture of being chosen by someone who was choosing someone else at the same time. They ended it quietly. No explosion. Just the slow recognition that the thing they'd protected so carefully hadn't been love. It had been the thrill of concealment, and when the concealment was gone, so was the thrill. I'd known it would go that way. Fantasies require walls to lean against. Remove the walls and they don't stand. Crispin and I started meeting for coffee about 6 weeks after the confrontation. Two people who had survived a specific category of betrayal that is nearly impossible to explain to anyone who hasn't lived it. He was careful and honest in the way of someone who had spent a long time not trusting his own perceptions, and had decided on the other side of it to stop second-guessing them. He never performed okayness he didn't actually feel. I found that more refreshing than I can adequately describe, after years of performing it myself. By autumn, we were having dinner instead of coffee. We took it slowly. We'd both learned what it costs to build on foundations you haven't fully examined. But what we were building felt structurally different. Transparent where my marriage had been opaque. Direct in ways that were occasionally uncomfortable and consistently real. I ran into my husband once, nearly a year later, at a hardware store on a Saturday. He looked older in the specific way that happens after a year of genuine reckoning. We stood in an aisle near the paint samples and were briefly cordial. He said, I convinced myself it wasn't what it was because admitting what it was meant admitting what I was doing to you. I said I appreciated him saying so. We went our separate ways. There was nothing else that needed to be said. I live alone now in an apartment I chose entirely by my own criteria. The morning light, the quiet, the bookshelf. Organized according to logic that belongs only to me. The silence here is not the silence of a house where someone has spent years making you doubt what you hear. It's the silence of space that is actually yours. There is something I used to say to myself during the worst of those months, when I was most thoroughly convinced that my instincts were the problem. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm the difficult one. Maybe this is just what it looks like when someone loves you in ways you don't know how to receive. I rehearsed these sentences until they felt like facts. I know now that I was never wrong. I was just very thoroughly taught to act as if I was. My husband wanted me on my knees in that living room on a Saturday evening in March. He'd arranged the lighting and the audience, and the script. He'd told me exactly what to say. He'd coached my expression and rehearsed my tone and believed, genuinely, that he had managed every element of the scene. What he forgot to account for was that I'd been watching him manage things for a very long time. He gave me a stage and a script and an audience. He just assumed he knew what I'd actually prepared. Women who have learned to trust themselves don't apologize for telling the truth. They apologize if anything. For all the months they spent being convinced they were wrong, to see what they could see so clearly. I don't apologize for that anymore. I already said everything I needed to say.